Good afternoon, everyone. It's a new week, and I'm still just as paranoid as ever as to whether you can hear me or not, but I think it seems to be working all right. How are we all doing? We've just toggled a few dials to try and make sure we're broadcasting now across all social media: YouTube, Periscope, LinkedIn, Facebook. So if you're tuning in on one platform and you prefer it on another, you'll probably find that we're also available there. 12:30 to 1 o'clock weekdays. I'm Jack Tune. We talk about most things healthcare, MSK type stuff, but then also, where appropriate, current affairs and how that overlaps. And so today's one of those days, I think. I've not got any guests joining me, but I've got Neil Langridge coming on the show tomorrow to talk about the roadmap on advanced practice. So we're not going to be talking about that today because that's going to be perfect for tomorrow. So do tune in tomorrow if you want to hear Neil's thoughts on all things that are exciting in advanced practice. He's been doing some great work there. But today, as I've put in the titles, what's it mean? The big talk over the weekend, apart from, of course, for Therapy Live Sport, which was on Saturday. But other than that, in current affairs world, most people talking about the presidential election. And so my first question to you guys, which I'll come to second, but I want to ask you guys straight away whether or not you're even bothered, whether you've noticed why you might think that matters, both in worldly sense, but particularly how you think it might influence healthcare. I'm interested in that. Do you think it has any bearing on some of the conversations that we have as a community in MSK even? Does that stuff matter? So do let me know. That's my core question to you guys, and how I want to get you participating today is on that sort of, do the U's and R's of US politics matter? And are they sometimes overplayed in terms of their influence, or is it something we should talk about more? I'm just interested in your thoughts, really, as to whether that matters. So Joe Biden being president, as far as we can see, pending legal challenges, of course, and some of the dramas. But how does that stuff influence you? Are you bothered? Is it overhyped? And also whether you feel it affects any of the conversations that we have, not just on this show, but across our sort of MSK and healthcare sphere on social media. So do let me know. Does that stuff matter? Now, Jim's kindly posted a comment on Periscope saying that I look better and less haggard. It's really good of him. Although it was him that called me haggard on the most part last week. So appreciate that. But yeah, maybe I'm a bit cheerier. And one of the reasons I'm cheerier is, of course, because Therapy Live Sport on Saturday went off without a hitch. If you've not heard about this, we did another big digital education conference on Saturday. 5,000 tickets that we sold out of on the week leading up to the show. And yeah, it went down really well. Really hope everyone enjoyed that attended. You can have a look on the website, therapy-live.co.uk. The infrastructure is still up and around. You can see how you can get involved as well. If you want to access the recorded content after the fact, you can do so by buying it as a package, or you can join as a member for £5 a month, and you get all the show content from this event, as well as last event, as well as future event. Basically, we're trying to create a community of practice to see if we can keep it free at the point of access, much like all of our podcasting that we've done over the years is free at the point of access. And then we're trying to work out if we can create a sustainable model. And the main reason for that, which I did talk about a little bit in closing of the show on Saturday, and on the quiz a little bit as well, I think, on the evening, which was good fun, was that, to my eye, if Physio Matters and the community that are around Physio Matters, which is obviously you guys, if we can't find a way to create event infrastructure such as that, both digitally and then in the future in person, of course, I'm not averse to that, then if we don't do it in industry, then some faceless, nameless events company that's just going to leverage gadgets and gizmos and create it as a business project that's independent of quality and doesn't actually keep their finger on the pulse of what is decent and vaguely scientifically credible, then they're just gonna dine out on success in a market where we know that ethics should be at the heart of what we're doing. And so that's one of the things we're constantly trying to balance, is trying to do interesting and innovative things, but create something that's sustainable, that is worth all of our time and the speaker's time, etc. So that's really important to us. So Therapy Live Sport went off without a hitch, and really appreciate you all for tuning in and enjoying it. Let us know what you thought if you did attend, or let us know if you're going to catch up with any of it after the fact. What did you enjoy? What didn't you? And then the final thing I'm going to sort of visit a little bit today is, I haven't sent this out. I was going to put an image up on screen. I best send that from my phone, actually. There's been a really interesting new article that's been published by Emeritus Professor, I think she is now, Shirley Sahrmann, in the game, of course, very much into movement dysfunction and come up with theories that try to move us away from pathological structural models into more biomechanical movement systems type approach. And so she's got a new article out. Trying to get this up on screen for you shortly, where she's sort of suggesting what the next 100 years would be. I don't know if it's come to a centenary of something, and she's talking about 100 years. So and so I'm interested in that. I haven't got a chance to read the full text yet, so I really want to get stuck into that. So maybe it's a little premature for me to be thinking about it, because obviously ideally I'd have got stuck into it, but I only noticed it first thing this morning, and it seems spicy enough for us to at least mention, and then obviously we can get into more detail in the future. But I'll just show you all a table in a second once I've loaded this up, or I'll show it you later. I don't know if you've noticed it. Meekins is putting dinosaurs on a face palm. That's what he thinks of it. I think he's noticed it as well. Shirley's editorial. Now, Adam, of course, getting in trouble. The dinosaurs, I don't mind. It's the fossilized thing that I think you need to be careful of. Yeah, it's something that is an example in many ways of some dated thoughts and beliefs, etc. But for me, it's a good example of how the counter narrative to this idea is not really being even understood. It's not as if this is a pushback against anything. Sometimes, probably every few months, you get, especially an academic pushback to sort of the crowd, in a sense, where they sort of make a hark back to be that manual therapy, or be that to a style of decorum that they prefer. There's all sorts of stuff like that. More recently, there's a call to consider journals accrediting courses, etc., to stay relevant. It's really that we've got these sort of completely legitimate arguments that they try to make, whereby they're sort of trying to say this is where we feel that things are going, and this is how we could influence them. Whereas with this, it just doesn't feel like that, because it's not actually seeming to reference the here and now. It doesn't seem to reference the relevant. It's something that is. It feels like you're constantly looking at what date it's published, because it doesn't feel like it acknowledges the core argument against that worldview, for want of a better term. And so, yeah, I'll definitely want to unpack that a little bit later in the show. But again, the three key things we're going to be talking about is that what's Sahrmannism, essentially what is Shirley up to now and what she's saying. Then, of course, how did you get on at Therapy Live? Did you enjoy it? And thirdly, whether or not you feel that American politics is especially relevant, whether you follow it, whether it matters, whether you're pleased, whether you're not. Get on each other, throw that out there. Any Trump fans in? I doubt it. You don't see many of them in healthcare for various different reasons. But I want to understand better as to whether or not I think we can deduce anything, or where there is any downstream effects that we can try and aim to predict or should account for in MSK practice. One of them that I want to throw out there is that it is quite relevant, and I did mention it with Sandy Hilton, and I hope to get John Ware on the show. He's a great guy who's more of a Trump fan than most, and I want to talk to him a little bit about stuff. But I mentioned to Sandy the fact that it's like in the back of my mind in the UK, sometimes not feeling like you've got much skin in the game in US healthcare. I see as being quite relevant in some ways that they have more of a market system within their healthcare than most of the world, and a lot of innovation seems to come from that. Now, not without major cost and major challenge, and I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily a model that I certainly don't see there anything there that I'd want to replicate in this country. But I do think that sometimes the downstream effects, less so in MSK, but certainly from what we've seen with proton beam, for example, came over from the US, which is really strong innovations into oncology treatment. We're fairly leading light in many ways in this country for protocols and trialist stuff that goes on, where you're refining things for things like cancer, especially, and our NIHR do some phenomenal work with research funding in the UK, etc. But I'm thinking more in terms of tech innovations, or sometimes even pharmaceutical innovations, where those high risk, high reward, quite hyper-capitalist strategies that occur even in healthcare due to the sort of economic model that surrounds their system means that it's got its downsides massively. I've heard about plenty of them. And it definitely needs a shake-up at whichever side of the political fence. You know, you rarely find someone who's massive fan of exactly what the current system is over there. However, I do think that that matters a little in healthcare, maybe less so MSK, but I think that matters on a structural level. It could well be that the world could suffer, at least in part, or at least in some ways, from if they were to adopt a full, what they call Medicare for all, but essentially socialized medicine like the NHS. If at the click of a finger without giving thought to it, I do think there might be some unintended consequences that we need to consider. That doesn't mean it's something that I wouldn't necessarily support. I can imagine being quite a vocal supporter of that movement in many ways, but it's something that I think needs to be sort of well thought out, because I think we will lose some of that interesting stuff there. The other side of it as well, when I think about US politics now, it influences my thinking in this space, you know, where I spend most of my time thinking as hard as I can in MSK, in healthcare, in education, is that there is something to be said from the symbolic nature of what a president means. You know, in the UK, it's funny because we've obviously got the little Queenie, and she's almost like a symbolic leader rather than anything of any major relevance. Whereas, you know, the president has to do some US patriotic symbolism, and so having someone so bombastic and never taking the pace off anything, you know, it's always been, can't believe it's been 4 years of sort of fast-paced, angry nonsense in many ways, you know, just sort of like and I don't just mean from him, but I just mean about him, like the temperatures just stayed really high over the course of 4 years, with him feeling, you know, he's being attacked, so, you know, and him being defensive and him on the attack. It just feels like everything's been so fraught. That seems to really matter cross-culturally, I think, not just in healthcare and MSK, of course, but I just mean like it feels like the water in which we swim, is that people have always had some way in which they can sort of point to, this sort of culture of leadership in many ways. You know, this is the style of degradation of norms, is how many people call it. But then also you've got people that are making bad arguments that then when you say, well, what justifies that point? And they just say cost Trump. You know, it's kind of this orange man bad, Trump derangement syndrome, where you've got people that aren't creating credible arguments cost Trump. You know, it's something that's been disappointing to see, that you've got people that are otherwise thoughtful thinkers that have just been sort of radicalized in opposition. And it just feels like in both ways, we need to try and make sure that we create some sort of more sensible, rational norms that he definitely doesn't exemplify, but then also the sort of fraught, emotional hatred of his style then also doesn't bring out the best in people either. And so I know that's not necessarily a healthcare and MSK take, but it's certainly something that I look on at and hope that to some degree we can get past it. Now, admittedly, from me, there is a third thing, which is that I find it hard that because of the understandable staunch opposition, especially to Trump as a character, but also Trumpism and the frustration with, you know, the policies and the politics of that style of populism particularly, means that sometimes people then end up inadvertently or even consciously, they're purposefully hyping the purity of its opponent. And you know, I see nothing in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as politicians that makes me think that they should be anything to aspire to as characters. Better than Trump is a totally reasonable position in many which ways, of course, but whether they are the best of the pick, both in terms of the candidates or the people, you know, I think of 30 colleagues that I've got that are in the US that I'd much sooner be president or somewhere nearer to the corridors of power than people like them. You know, it's something that I just don't see, that just because you might support the fact that they then beat Trump doesn't mean that they're suddenly people that I'd want anyone to aspire to be more like. You know, I just think that as far as I'm aware, and I pay a bit of attention to this stuff, is that they're not, you know, you can support the fact that they won without supporting the fact that, you know, or trying to pretend that they are something decent. Like that does concern me, that sometimes people think that they are up to something. If you look into them and you look into some of their some of the things that they've been involved in, you know, it's like, no, they're not my type of politician, if I'm honest. You know, we've got to be careful not to, because we've had this idiot bombastic liar, that we're just going to get a different flavour of bad person, in my opinion, that we then have to sort of pretend is all decent. And I think that that's the unfortunate thing, is that you get a bit of spin there. So that's just a total raw opinion from me, which I just think is hard to separate that off. We can all be relieved in many ways that we might try and get to some sort of sense of normality, but I don't buy the fact that we have to go one step further and then pretend that the new administration is of some sort of quality and caliber that is then, you know, going to be inspirational in any which way. You know, it's something that I think is a fault. I know that we're just going to get a different flavour of false prophet. So what do you think? That's always useful, as ever. You know, most people tune into this after the fact, and so please do let me know what you think, especially if you disagree. That's the most important thing. Let me know if that's a load of nonsense, and whether or not, you know, the Saint Biden, I'm missing something, then let me know. No doubt people will be sending me links. That's what usually happens. Read this, look at this, watch this video. So yeah, please do let me know. But I want to get stuck into the Sahrmann thing, because I haven't put that up on screen yet, have I? There we go. So hopefully you can see that. So this is sort of a table that was within the, what will we call it? Editorial that Sahrmann had published. It's literally recent. I think it got submitted in sort of June time, so it's very current in terms of it's just been published. But it's just to highlight a couple of these things. You know, it's basically what we know of her work, really, which is this pathokinesiologic and kinesiopathologic, which she explains in different ways. Dysfunctional movement resulting in pathology in physiological systems, and then pathology induced by movement that is provocative. It's this notion of, you know, moving badly, and a fairly, you know, she famously helped us move from a structural model to a biomechanical one, but then has held beliefs that I and others have somewhat moved past, whereby this notion of people moving badly or moving well, and that we can aspire to certain things, correcting for dysfunctions that are then, if not symptomatic, are going to lead to symptoms, that seems to leave off the many different contributing factors to symptomology, but namely the fact that, you know, pain we understand to be, I mean, it's a bit of a butchered way of saying it, but a neurological phenomenon of a sort, an emergent phenomenon in which is very individualized, and something that doesn't seem to correlate well with particulars of scapular control, for example, apart from in extreme circumstances. And even then, it's something that realistically, considering the trainable model in which Sahrmann espouses for treatment of it, it sort of feels like it's dated thinking. And it's something that, as I said, my biggest issue with it isn't that, you know, I'm not a fan of that stuff now. It's more that, what is it that we're doing? What is it that the industry's doing at large that is meaning that Shirley and others aren't necessarily, it's not coming to that conclusion is fair enough, but in this piece, from what I've seen, and as I said, I've not read it in as much detail as I'd like, but having skimmed it and looked at some of the conclusions, it's like, it doesn't feel like there's an appropriate grappling with anywhere near the strongest argument against it. And what is it we're doing? How are we managing to run this parallel world whereby she's not necessarily engaging with the process of thinking hard about how her model holds up to its best scrutiny, and then also offering to counter it? And coming to a conclusion like this is totally fair enough, but it's just, you know, it's something that, to see what feels like parallel worlds running is really disheartening, because it's something that something's not cutting through. And admittedly, that runs this way as well, right? There's plenty of things about what Shirley's saying in this that's just does not cut through with me. I imagine not with our listeners and our network. But why not is kind of more obvious to answer, in a sense that it's like, this is how we've moved past that model. Thanks for all the work in that direction, Shirley. But this is what we've matured it to because of this evidence and this thinking and this philosophy, and how we now integrate with our patients. And that it's just that, but the fundamental thing that then, the reason we're not seeing people continue to fail to grapple with the counter argument that we would then be proposing, is fascinating to me. Like then there's a lot of corners of it. I mean, it's not just to pick on this particular thing from Shirley, but she's such an incredible and famous thinker in this direction, who's done a lot for. She's we stand on her shoulders in many ways for what she broke down and who she changed the minds of when we were in a very narrow orthopedic paradigm, and the autonomy and credibility of physios to deliver rehab, and for her to move us away from narrow structural thinking. But then also just didn't take that next step, and it just became that the category errors just became biomechanical ones rather than structural ones. And that's what she's sort of suggesting in here, really, is that she's always aspiring for us to get some consistency with regards to diagnostic labeling based on dysfunctional movement. And it's just that we can't help but disagree with that in the most part. That means that therefore we're not taking up a mantle, like Shirley's saying. And this article's about what's the next 100 years bring, means that no one's going to take that on, because she's not speaking a language that we even recognize much anymore. But how is that happening? And how are we not at least having a conversation that moves us forward? Now, what we're going to try and do is reach out to Shirley and see if she'll come on Physio Matters, and we can sort of talk about this, or speak to someone who's into that school of thought, because there could well be something that we're missing, that we're needing to understand. And it's not that it's failure to grapple with ideas, it's that they've grappled with them and moved past them themselves. Maybe we're the ones that are behind, but generally speaking, we need a better conversation. I'm concerned about this parallel strategy and how it's running, so I'm definitely interested in your guys' thoughts. Meekins has said that it's a opinion piece at the end of the day, a glorified blog. I know it's funny that you call things an editorial when they're published in a journal article, but they are blogs. But also the discussion section in most articles, most academic articles, it's just a blog at the end of a database justification for said blog. These things, sometimes it's too dismissive to call things blogs, but similarly as well, there's some terribly unreferenced and cowboy blogs out there. Not Adams, of course. That's not what I'm meaning. But yeah, I'm interested in your guys' thoughts on this as ever. Do let me know, be that through any channel that you wish. When you're listening to the after the fact on your commutes, etc., then please let me know what your thoughts are. We've got a comment here. Let's have a little look. Where's that come from? Oh yeah, Paul's got in touch on LinkedIn. Sorry, I can't show the whole comment on here, but he said the irony of Trump is this: many people have benefited from his tax cuts, actually liked his economics. That said, his statesmanship has been appalling, and his inward-looking approach has isolated the US on the world stage. Biden is a one-term president who, in his opinion, will rebuild the US position on the international stage. Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate your thoughts on that, and also, please do keep them coming from anyone else after the fact. Obviously, we're running out of time now, but do let me know what your thoughts are on how US politics influences you. I think I do agree as well on the front of the statesmanship stuff matters. I think it's like as I say, a cross-cultural thing in terms of sort of decorum and how we can better improve the dialogue really across all of on the world stage. Taking the heat off, take the pace off the ball is probably the better metaphor there, I suppose. But then similarly, as Paul said there, I know of many people that look on and think that there is an ideological political argument for smaller state. Well, it's not been small state, has it? It's been lower tax within quite a large state. He's someone that's partly imposed a lot. It's like a populist large state approach that he's taken, but the citizens having more of their own money and therefore choosing to do with it what they wish is something, rather than pooling and sort of, the socialized medicine is a good example of it, but also socialized education and more public sector infrastructure and stuff. And so you do end up having that discussion, that ideological discussion that sort of very, very much swings more in the US. And I said that with Sandy, didn't I? It's like any given issue just feels like you've got far wider spectrum in the US. It feels, I feel like weirdly it's a bit boring sometimes in UK politics. And you think about, you've got the extremes, but there's just nowhere near any central power. You don't seem to have many people that would ascribe to those things on any given issue. Whereas in the US, you've got this really quite broad Overton window of what is reasonable to discuss. And I just find that fascinating. And I think that it matters, in the core ways that I talked about. But I definitely would love any of your thoughts on whether you feel it really has any lasting or enduring impact on healthcare. And if I'm missing anything in MSK, you might tell me that, oh yeah, Biden in a former life was a physio or something that I didn't know. If there's anything that's really quite specific to MSK, then I'm all ears. But in healthcare terms, I mentioned before about the fact that there are these risks, as I see them, with regards to health technology. That's where I am most interested in. And it's not a strong enough concern for me to suddenly be against any sort of progressive reforms in a direction of healthcare. Really, I think that free at the point of access for baseline care is something that just seems like the humane thing to do in a civilized society. But equally, the baby out with the bathwater, as is my favorite expression, could occur if we don't do it thoughtfully. The way that could have knock-on effects if we've not got a bastion of innovation in health tech that isn't over reliant on subsidy and state funding. So you've got, you need that competition approach to drive innovation and standards, high risk, high reward. I'd hate the fact that we could accidentally lull the progress on things like, heart disease, stroke, and oncology, these big killers, let's say, or even just on a public health level, if we're not thinking carefully and thoughtfully about where those big ticket items are in terms of health tech and how that fits and bleeds onto fitness, I guess, as well. Be mortified if we miss that just because we were being clumsy and ideological with policy and not being thoughtful. So they're the areas in which I think it overlaps most significantly. Again, all based on raw opinion. Thanks so much again for tuning into Therapy Live Sport. Really appreciate it. Please keep your feedback coming in. It's been difficult to get through it all. Have a look on the website and do check that out. It's still all there, all the infrastructure, as well as ways in which you can get involved, be that through membership or recordings, or keep an eye out for future shows as well. We're just trying to create a sustainable model so that then together we can do it in industry. And I don't mean in like a full come by our sort of approach, but what I mean is that we're trying to create things that are going to be close and even caring about quality science and applied science within MSK and sports, of course, rehab practice. Because if we don't, then faceless, nameless events companies that I keep suggesting, that this shadowy beast of events companies that are always going to capitalize on things like this if we don't get our shit together. So therapy-live.co.uk, have a look on the site if you haven't already, and keep your eyes peeled for more news in that direction, especially if you've bought recordings or memberships, etc. Then you're in for a busy week. We're going to move everyone into that. We're loading all the videos as we speak, so really excited to get you that, and thank you as ever for tuning in. So if I remember rightly, let me love you and leave you. All right, see you later. I'll see you tomorrow for, as I said, Neil Langridge is on the show tomorrow talking about advanced practice. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. He brought out the roadmap, which is a huge career innovation, I think, for the not just the profession of physiotherapy, but it's kind of the whole MSK sector. And it is cross-professional. But yeah, the advanced practice roadmap and how we can deal with that. It's going to be fascinating to talk to Neil. And I'm going to definitely get stuck into, why did it come about, like the reasons for it, which is something that obviously me and Neil have been into conversation about historically, but definitely be good to get his take on what this means and its position as a document, as a statement, as an intention for HEE and all the others that have been involved in it. So yeah, do tune in tomorrow to hear me speak to Neil about all that. But otherwise, thanks a lot and welcome to a new week. We've got a big week on the show coming up. I'll see you tomorrow.